Hello, my name is Michelle Artibee, and I serve as the Director of Workforce Wellbeing in the Division of Human Resources at Cornell University. My colleagues and I deliver programs and services to help employees and their families thrive. Obviously, the pandemic and other national and local events have created many challenges for families at Cornell and across the world. Children and their caregivers are still navigating changes to public school, childcare, and how they go about their activities and routines. Some children have even had to cope with loss or grief, either directly or indirectly related to COVID. During this keynote, we will discuss the impact these events have had on child mental health, as well as strategies caregivers of all kinds, parents, grandparents, teachers, can use. Our guest expert is Dr. Dana E. Crawford. Good morning, Dr. Crawford.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Crawford is a pediatric and clinical psychologist and the developer of the Crawford Bias Reduction Theory and Training, a systematic approach to reducing bias, prejudice, and racism. She's a graduate of Howard, Temple, and Miami universities and has degrees in counseling, African American studies, psychology, and the arts. Dr. Crawford is currently a scholar in residence at Columbia University and the Zuckerman Mind Brain Behavior Institute. And she has a thriving practice in Manhattan. Very busy woman. Dr. Crawford, let's start with discussing how children are faring right now. We are 9 months into the pandemic in the United States and longer for some of our listeners that are located in other countries. Can you tell us just overall, how has the pandemic impacted children?
Yeah, it's interesting. As you were reading my bio, I keep saying I need to add, I'm also surviving pandemic parenting. I live with two roommates who are 4 and almost 2 years old. And so, this topic is professionally relevant to me, but also personally. And I think a lot of kids are responding in the same ways that adults are. It's variant. For some of our youngsters, they are having one of the most beautiful experiences of their lifetime, being able to have access to their parents in ways that many parents have only dreamed of. For other kids, it's a significant loss in their routine, in their community, in their relationships. And so similar to the ways that adults may be experiencing things internally, how they're expressing it externally may be different from adults.
Thank you. In the United States, many people, children included, have experienced or witnessed events fueled by racism, from microaggressions to horrific killings. This is unfortunately not new for our country, though, video and audio evidence of these events is now more widely available. I'm curious, how has the mental health of Black and Brown children been affected by these events this year? And also by the increased discussions that we're seeing happen in communities and in schools and at home about racism?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, it's hard because childhood is such a wide range, right? We have birth until some might dare say 23 years old. Yeah. And so for younger children, some of them may have not even been exposed. And younger, I'm thinking 5 and under, may not have been exposed because their parents haven't turned on the news, they don't have social media. But I think they are impacted in a way that seems less direct because of the energy. I know when I watched the recorded murder of George Floyd that day, I was devastated. And I can't imagine my children didn't feel that pain, no matter how much I tried to hide it. Children are very perceptive. And so the ways that they become impacted is often if a parent leaves them alone in their emotional world to determine things by themselves, right? So if I'm not talking to my kids to say, Mommy's feeling a little bit sad today, let's have some extra snuggles. Let's do some deep breathing together. Those types of things. So they're not alone in their psychological experience. For our older kids, we can have more direct conversations. Often what I found is the kids between 6 to 10, for Black and Brown kids, there were a lot of questions. A lot of questions as to why is this happening? Am I safe? Is something going to happen to me? Is something going to happen to my parents or to my older siblings? Because children often have older siblings. I think for our older children, it's a combination of things. Some of them become apathetic and stop believing in the things that we tell them matter in this world. What's the point? You start to hear those kinds of conversations. What's the meaning of it? Why should I try? Other children become very active. And I think this was, for me as a child, I became a bit of an activist and started to challenge things that felt unfair and challenging and confronting adults. Why is this happening? What is this about? And that's where I think the amazing part of this generation of going out and protesting peacefully and opening up conversations. I've seen a lot of young people that are now to a point that they're not going to tolerate racism anymore. And they're saying that is racist, that is prejudice, that is bias, that's not acceptable. And then I think there's some young people that just go within themselves and start to feel depressed, anxiety, social isolation. And those young people start to check out of their schoolwork. And so it really depends on the personality of the child, the resources that that family has, as well as how their family is communicating and connecting with them.
Thank you for that. As you were responding, it was making me think of a podcast that I listen to quite regularly. It's called the Cornell Inclusive Excellence Podcast, and it just provides wonderful information to listeners about having conversations on uncomfortable or hidden topics that folks are experiencing in our world. They have a Black at Cornell sub-series to this program that I think is valuable for people outside of Cornell to listen to. We'll put the link up for you in this program, and I just encourage you to give it a listen. I had the honor of being a guest in a recent episode where we discussed family life and individual well-being from this perspective of diversity and inclusion. So check that out. You know, I am also thinking about the U.S. presidential election and how that has impacted the mental well-being of children. It's so interesting because, as you said, youth are getting engaged in ways that just blow my mind. I have a young adult in my life who is transgendered and is following the elections, both presidential and local elections, looking for that connection to their personal experience and how that elected official will kind of support them. So it's pretty amazing to see that kind of interaction and interest. Just more broadly speaking, has the election impacted the mental well-being of children? And if so, how?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. You know, for many people, they raise their children in a way that at the core is you treat people with respect. You do not call names. Even at a very young age, you do not call someone a name. You do not bully people. And I think what has happened in the last 4 years is this idea of contempt, this idea that it's okay if you disagree with someone to call them names. That does impact mental health because it changes the values of a society. If I don't agree with you, then I get to just call you a name. If I don't agree with you, I can be disgusted with you. And this very belief system, somehow, that having different political views is acceptable in terms of name calling. So the impact that has on mental health is one, I think for children who do disagree with each other, it increases aggression and it makes it acceptable to possibly be verbally or physically violent towards someone that you think is different from you or you perceive as different, because we're all the same in a lot of different ways and our differences are to be celebrated. And the idea that difference makes it okay to aggress someone or to harm someone or to think less of them. On the other hand, for children that are non-binary, for children that are brown or Black or living in an environment where they're not part of the dominant culture, they don't feel reflected, it raises the question of safety. Am I going to be safe? And that's trauma, honestly. You know, the big trauma questions are, am I safe in this world? If something happens to me, is someone going to protect me? People are out to harm me. And when you're a young person, you're just already vulnerable. You got a little bitty body and you're not sure about the world and you don't have certain resources. You don't have any money. You might not be able to drive. You're a vulnerable person. And to know that the adults in the world are not going to necessarily protect you or people that look like you is horrifying. And it plants a seed of trauma that I dare say for generations, or at least the next 10 to 20 years, we're going to see young people having to heal from the things that we've seen adults do in the political realm.
Mm-hmm. I think that, the collective trauma of the pandemic, these events that have happened, so much occurring all at the same time, has left a lot of people just thinking, oh my gosh, what do I even do? How do I even move in this world right now? So the thing I'm wondering is, how can caregivers help children cope with all of these world events? I mean, it can be so, like, where do you even start? I would think that these strategies look different, obviously, for younger children versus middle and high school age children. But when you're working with a parent who's really overwhelmed by all of this, what do you encourage them to do?
I actually start with the parent. You are the tool. You are the anchor in your child's world. You are that secure attachment. And so starting with yourself, so there's a difference between self-care and self-soothing. And often in a lot of the narratives and conversations about trauma-informed care and conversations about take care of yourself, there's not this difference pointed out between self-soothing and self-care. So self-soothing are the things that make you feel better right in this moment. So it might be binge watching some TV shows. It might be, possibly having different beverages that make you feel more calm. It may be eating certain foods that make you feel better. It may even be the ways that you're engaging in exercise just to burn energy. Self-care are the things that you do that help you grow and help you sustain the things that you want to do in your life. And so the conversation for many parents starts with, what do you need to do to soothe yourself from the stress of taking care of someone else when you're not sure how to take care of yourself? And what do you need to do to get to a place of growth, of self-care? And so that first part of anchoring the parent is crucial. And that's such a hard thing because as parents, we often sacrifice our own needs for our kids. There have been days that I literally just jump out of the bed, get my kids' teeth brushed, get them food, and I haven't even peed yet, right? I haven't done anything for me. But when you take care of yourself first, it's similar to when when outside used to be open and we could fly places, and they would say, put your mask on first. When you are doing that, then you're modeling, one, self-care for your kids, and two, you're going to be a more patient parent. You're going to be a more present parent. You're going to be more engaged. And so once you are a little bit more solid, the next step is reevaluating your values. So for many of us, we had all these big, lavish dreams related to our kids and in terms of what they should be eating, who they should be around and their friends, what books they should be reading, what after-school activities and weekend activities they were supposed to be involved in, traveling, academic rigor, all of these concepts that, guess what? They are not appropriate right now. When you are managing a medical pandemic, the unveiling of racism, global climate change, the most polarized election of our lifetime, it might not be as important that they eat those vegetables that day. And so after you're feeling a little bit more anchored, you can start to shift as a parent from being emotion-driven to being more value-driven, which is hard, but really asking yourself, does this matter right now? I remember a few weeks ago, my daughter was having a rough morning. She woke up, she wasn't sleeping as well, and she just said, hey, can I have some candy? Now, my child would have never, ever before this pandemic even thought to ask me, one, for a piece of candy, and two, in the morning, right? And I was having a rough time. I hadn't slept so well. I was, just kind of achy, just exhausted, just kind of over it. And I said, you know what? Let's both eat a Kit Kat for breakfast. And it was delicious. And it was amazing. And it was a great moment. And we looked each other in our eyes and we kind of giggled and we're like, we're eating candy for breakfast. And I think that my daughter will remember that present interaction way more than if I had given her a whole lecture and like, well, we don't eat candy in this house. Do you want to get cavities? That's not how we take care. Like all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. That has to stop, and it's exhausting for everyone. It's irritating to your kids. You hear yourself and you're like, who am I, Mom? Is that my own voice? It's this part of you that is so oriented towards a belief system that we don't have access right now to. And we really have to think about what's necessary in this moment and what are our core goals as we survive these really challenging things, and how can we get to a point of thriving?
Mm-hmm. That is beautiful, Dr. Crawford. my daughter's 21 years old, and I have often found myself thinking, how would I be navigating this year if she was a young adult, young and going through, distance learning and some of these other things that our younger children are going through. And I just keep coming back to this idea that I would want her to know that she's loved, that she's in a stable environment, and that people care about her. It rarely does, in my mind, do grades and other things kind of spring in. But I think we get so tied to what our expectations are and our dreams are, really, for our children, that it can be difficult to kind of open our perspective a little bit to the here and now. Let's talk about something along those lines in terms of the positivity of this all. As a result of the pandemic, we've got a lot of caregivers and educators who are helping children learn from home. What have been some of the positives that have come out of distance learning that you've seen?
Yeah, I think some of the amazing things is just time. If you're able to orient yourself to a place that you can be present, having time with your kids, it's one of our greatest commodities. As Americans, we work so hard. We work so much, and we hadn't before I say, do not have, it's currently we do, access to our kids in the ways that maybe we want. We used to possibly spend 10 hours or more, 12 hours away from our kids. And so one of the positives that come out of it is just having more time together, even though that can be challenging at times. I think the other thing is being more engaged in your child's learning experience. So what are they actually learning? What are they talking about? What are their experiences? I heard a parent the other day who said she started getting the same textbook as her child, and the two of them read it together and then study together. And so this mom's like, I'm learning about, economics in this way I never thought about. My kids in high school, we're both learning together, and it becomes a connection point. That's great for the mom's brain too, to continue that learning and models for the child. The child becomes more invested because, hey, my mom is willing to take this class and study, so I guess I have to show up for her. These kinds of things become really beautiful connections. I think the other thing is being more creative about how to sustain connection. So I know a lot of families that live all over the country. And prior to COVID, they would see each other a few times a year if they were fortunate. And that would be it. Maybe a phone call here, a phone call there. But I've heard so many families start to do like Zoom parties, having moments where people are FaceTiming more, being a lot more creative in distant connection than we ever have been. And I think one of the other more beautiful things that have come out of it is that families start to be able to be more simple with things, just getting back to the basics. Things are not so complex. You don't have that many options. And so playing a simple game of Monopoly or Memory or Uno or, Connect Four, and like all of these different ways that you can get really creative with your kids, even with your older kids, I think it's been a really beautiful part of the pandemic. The other thing is it allows kids to just slow down. Many of our kids were so overscheduled, especially New York City kids. I feel like, I just hear they're running from here to there and do this thing and this extracurricular and this extra thing. And now it just slow down and really focus on what are the core, most important things that you want to achieve and to engage in.
Thank you for that. I'm thinking about the role that extended family plays in the well-being of a child, right? Grandparents, aunts and uncles, extended family, however that may look. And it's been really difficult to navigate those types of, connections when we have the health and safety best practices, to care for ourselves and care for our loved ones. Has the distance that's created had a negative impact on child mental health, do you think? Or for those that are maintaining connection via Zoom and phone calls or whatever, are they kind of thriving through that in their relationships? And I ask that because I know a lot of parents are worried about it. are worried that having only connection through virtual means in some way is less than. And I know myself, and most of us would love to have a real hug with our family members. I'm not suggesting that it's an exact replacement, but can you talk a little bit about kind of the mental health impact of what it means to have extended family that we're not seeing on a regular basis in person?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Michelle, you can probably already tell that I'm a pretty optimistic, upbeat person. But that's I don't want to fail to mention that every child does not live in an environment in which they feel seen and they feel loved and they feel connected and who they are is valued. Parents have mental health issues, and that can be really challenging for kids. Mm-hmm. And for many young people, their extended family are a refuge from the mental health issues and the personality clashes that they have with their family, their family of origin, their parents, especially in those teenage years. I know as a teenager, like, my parents, like, I couldn't, even though they're lovely now, and so some of it isn't even a reflection of the parent. It's just a reflection of the developmental stage that the child is in. And so Zoom and other platforms are lovely, but they're not the same. Mm-hmm. There's something uniquely special about sitting in a room with a person, feeling the same temperature on your skin, smelling the same things in the air, and potentially just sitting in silence with a person. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've invited families to get creative about is sensory experiences via Zoom. Mm-hmm. So cooking together, making the same recipe, and then eating that same meal rather than just like, hey, let's get together and eat. Let's eat the same thing. The other, something so simple, is using the same hand lotion or the same lotion. So you smell the same thing as the person. Mm-hmm. So it starts to create more of a sensory experience because we know that smell is associated with memory. And so even in that sense, we can smell the same thing. We can burn the same candles. I know for my family, I'm giving everyone the same candle for the holidays. So we have that when we're on a Zoom. So we're all smelling the same thing. Mm-hmm. Just those little touches can enhance the virtual space that is, quite frankly, getting a little bit old. A lot of us are tired of being on a screen, and the thought of getting on a screen with a family member after being on a screen for school all week or being on a screen all week for work. It's mm-hmm. like, yeah, that's not what I want to do. Nothing about that feels like love and connection. But, even having different Zoom spaces that are for family time and friend time rather than academic time. So on Friday nights, I've started Zooming with friends and laying in my bed. Now, I'm not giving this presentation today in my bed. That's not the professional Zoom space, but laying in bed and just like laying on a pillow, talking to a friend, having some tea with, like, that's lovely. Mm-hmm. And so even being creative in the Zoom is going to be crucial. I think parents and extended family have a valid reason to be concerned. Mm-hmm. It's not the same. Mm-hmm. The other piece is what privacy looks like now. So when that young person used to be able to go to their grandma's house or their grandpa's house or their non-binary relative's house, that was a private space that their parents didn't have access to. No one was overhearing the call. No one was like, oh, tell grandma this, while you're like trying to be like, my parents suck, so I guess they're my parent. And the parents like right there in the business. And so that's another crucial thing to enhance those relationships is to give privacy, mm-hmm. even if you overhear, to not intrude, to keep the boundaries so you're not all up in someone else's conversation when they're trying to build those things mm-hmm. With that extended family member. So it does require us to be more intentional. But in order to be intentional, you have to be grounded so you're not reactional. And that goes back to that original point of being able to be in a place as a parent that you're really reflecting on your values and your goals for right now, rather than being so reactive to what these old values were before this pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Crawford, we got a question from an audience member just asking whether the effect of using a small screen so many hours of the day, such as an iPhone, how that might impact their health. Is that something that you would feel comfortable speaking to?
You said how that might impact I missed the last part.
Their health. Yeah, and that could be mental health, but obviously we know there's other physical health issues related to eye strain and things like that. Is there anything from kind of a brain perspective that would be helpful to talk about.
Yeah, it is concerning. Before COVID, we had lots of conversations about limit screen time. And now all of a sudden it's like screen time. Did you log on? We're taking attendance, and that whole narrative is gone. I am concerned. I think about my kids' brains, and when my daughter was doing preschool via Zoom, the cost and the benefits to that. Mm-hmm. The ways that I try and counteract it and recommend to my patients is exercise. And so if you are on a small screen, can you take 5 minutes in between different lectures, different events that you're doing on screen to stretch, to close your eyes, to draw, to create? So things that you're accessing other parts of your brain, so you're not just building up the muscle memory related to learning on a screen. So getting into physical books. So everyone used to have, these Kindles and these fun ways of doing books. Now is a great time for people to read a physical book, for so many different levels. It's the visual of the words on the page. It's the sensory smell. Remember what books smell like? It's the sensory part of a book. It's the feeling of the texture. It's the shared experience of possibly, sitting next to your child and them having a book and you're passing it and you're reading it. And so it can be a very engaged experience. And those types of interventions become a lot more critical than they ever were, because they used to be able to just walk out of their house and go to school. And so they had a different sensory experience. And so I think my summary point on that is really, we can't change the reality of the situation now with screens. Our kids do have to go to school on a computer for many of us around the country. Some of us are fortunate that our kids can safely go to school in person some of the time. But for the most part, this is where we are. Mm-hmm. And so we can, have all of these theories about, well, is this bad for the brain? Is it not bad? Okay, this is what it is. Mm-hmm. What do we do to keep the brain healthy with what we're given? And I think those exercise points and other sensory engaging things for the brain are going to be crucial.
Along those same lines, with keeping the brain healthy, we had a participant ask about kind of those high-level things that we need to be doing to support mental health for our children. And I think sometimes it's so basic, it's so in front of us with nutrition and sleep and water, but we often, those are the first things to go out the window when we're feeling stressed and focused on other things. Can you just speak briefly about how those things, what the most important things are as they relate to mental health? You mentioned exercise already. What would you add to that?
Yeah, so exercise, getting the blood flowing is the very top. Even if you're doing jumping jacks for 60 seconds, even if you're, just briskly walking around the apartment. I live in New York, so it is a very quick brisk because our square footage is small. But moving your body. The second piece is drinking water. Like that I used to drink so much water when I was in the office. I had like a little bottle and I would refill it. And I realized in the first couple of weeks of the pandemic, I was just like a dried out sponge. I just wasn't drinking enough water. And so reminding our kids to drink water. For us, we got our kids new water bottles. So then it was like fun, like, oh, we could decorate it, put stickers, and like, that's your special water bottle. For our older kids, it's reminding them, hey, are you staying hydrated? And that's a little bit annoying. So another thing is apps. There are several different apps that you can actually, one of my favorites that I use with kids in the hospital, I forget the exact name, but it's like you grow a plant. And so every time you drink a water, you click on the app and then it makes this plant grow. And then if you don't drink enough water, it gives you like a little alarm, and then the plant like shrivels up and like becomes pretty dried out like your body. So you can even make it fun and make it a competition. There are a lot of different ways that you can incorporate family, like who's drinking the most water. That can be relational. The other piece is sleep. Right now, kids already are terrible often with sleep. Our teens, like, oh my gosh, please, with your sleep. And being home lends itself to having horrific sleep hygiene. And so trying to have as much of a routine as possible, where you wake up at the same time and you go to bed at the same time, is really crucial. Reintroducing napping. So you may be a parent that does not believe that kids should be sleeping and like get up and move. But I don't know if you've experienced this, but the things that I used to do before COVID just take more energy. I find myself just more tired, and that's stress. It is stressful every day living in a world that seems like you don't know what's going to happen next. 2020 has been brutal. And that is not to be negated. So having a nap that's less than 45 minutes, because if it's more than 45 minutes, it's going to bed, and then it will interfere with your sleep. But having a nap that's less than 45 minutes can be a really nice reset, and being strategic about that rather than trying to fight through it, listening to your body. If your body is telling you every day I'm tired, then listen to it. And so even those things can be conversations with your kids to help them. And if you have good sleep, good hygiene, and you're hydrated, the other things will come, like the ability to concentrate, the ability to focus because your blood is flowing, you have enough water in your body, you're rested. Without those components, you're going to struggle. And the last thing is actually taking care of the body. So physical hygiene, showering every day. And I dare say for our teens, brushing your teeth a minimum of twice a day. And some parents may be like, yeah, that's an issue in the house. So, getting in the routine of actually taking care of your body, showering. I've instructed all of my patients to have clothing that you wear for your day and then clothing that you wear when you're off for the day. And so similar to like school clothes or work clothes, and these are different from, I'm not saying you have to put on jeans, but if you have sweatpants and you're wearing sweatpants, make them your work sweatpants. Make them your work sweatshirt, that there is a transition, that you feel that boundary of the start of the day and the end of the day, because that allows your brain to transition to different points.
I love that. And, in the work-life world, we're often talking to individuals about boundaries and about routines. And, everything has been so upended in 2020 for those work-life boundaries for folks, especially those that prefer to segment their lives. Their work life and their home life have been very challenged by this. One of the challenges that I hear from families very often is around the social development of their children. So children are desperate to see their friends. They may have a really hard time accepting whatever safety measures the parent has put into play or has decided upon. And I know this is creating a lot of angst for families, particularly those with teenagers who may have their own license, who want to go see their friends. And it's like, Mom, Dad, you just don't understand, I want to be able to do this. And yet the parent's doing everything they can to keep their child healthy and safe. How can a parent navigate those conversations with their children right now? I think that brings with it a lot of tension and stress to the relationship. What advice would you give?
Yeah, this one is a really complicated one, Michelle, because it's so interesting. Every family doesn't even believe in the same safety protocols when it comes to COVID. So we have a family in our building that we were very close to, that we absolutely adored. Our kids did, different classes together, and their family doesn't wear the mask. They don't wear masks. We see them out. We look outside our window and we see them out, and they're not wearing a mask. And so even if we wanted to, be a little bit flexible, we can't go that far. We cannot be with people who don't wear a mask. We have fundamentally different beliefs about what science is. And so that's not flexible for us. We try to do Zoom class or Zoom meetings and those things. But I think for our teens, it becomes really hard because, one, you don't know what that family believes in terms of safety and wearing a mask. And two, you don't know if that teen is even going to follow what the family is saying. Teens are very rebellious. They want to do things on their own. That autonomy is very developmentally appropriate. I think the conversation is very honest, and it goes back to that point about having an intimate relationship, emotional relationship with your child, where you're sitting and you're talking about real things with them. You're not waiting for them to bring it up. You're not saying things like, well, if they didn't mention it, it must not be bothering them. It's being very strategic and sitting down and saying, I am very worried that if you do not wear a mask, you will get COVID. And so this conversation between, well, you're not going to die of COVID, to people who die, there is so much room between getting COVID and dying and getting COVID, surviving and having long-term health issues, or getting COVID and infecting someone that you love and then them dying, but you survive. or them not dying, but them getting COVID and having long-term health issues, right? And so these are real complicated matters. I think it starts with, one, saying what your fear is, 2, talking about what the science is, 3, saying what the expectation is of your family and what it means to be a good citizen of your household, and that you're going to trust them. The other part is, unfortunately, depending on your beliefs, you may or may not believe in this, you may have to incentivize them. You know, you may have to have some reward plans. You may have to say, you know, you can earn these things by following these rules. And then the other piece is you may have to support them by creating social distance outings for them. It may be being in the park, and now that it's freezing, I've just accepted I have to wear more layers of clothes. We're going to be outside and we're going to be cold because this matters to my child. And for people with older kids, if your values seeing their friends, it may be very clear, like, I will take you to the park. You follow these rules. I'm going to sit in the car. I'm going to watch you and keep an eye, and you'll still be able to see your friends. And it may also be needing to be a conversation with the friends of your kids, the parents of your friends, your kids' friends. And so that conversation may have to be really uncomfortable to say, like, this is what we believe in. I want to prioritize my child and your child's friendship. Can we agree to these types of things? And then some of it may be supporting their friends, that there may not be the opportunity to be with them and hang out with their friends physically because of the choices that different families make.
Thank you. And I think that this is top of mind, whether it's with friendships or with family members, as we come up on the Thanksgiving holiday in the United States, as we enter the winter season and we have more time indoors, Christmas, Hanukkah, other celebrations. I know a lot of families are grappling with what's safe to do. And, you know, we certainly don't have the perfect answers to that, but I know it is very concerning from the idea of sustaining good relationships with those family members and friends. So, you know, thinking about the winter months, for those of us in the north who get a lot of snow and cold, I've heard from a number of families who are actually pretty nervous about it from their own kind of mental health perspective as parents, but also how they're going to support their children when there's even more time indoors. And, you know, even getting outdoors to go sledding and do different activities, it still is less time for most families than even in the summer and warmer months. Do you have any thoughts about seasonal affective disorder with children in the winter months, or things that families should be thinking about as we head into kind of this colder time period?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm very concerned about, you know, the impact of COVID depression and anxiety. And then 2, seasonal affective disorder. And then just the cumulative effect of now, you know, we're approaching a year that we've all been going through this. It is really old. You know, we're exhausted. And so what I have encouraged families to do is to really sit back and think about, like, why can't we go outside? Mm-hmm. Yes, it is cold. Mm-hmm. Yes, we will be uncomfortable. But can we go outside for 10 minutes? Maybe in the summer we would have spent 2 hours in the park. Maybe we go outside 4 times a day for 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what could that look like? You know, when you start to see some of the red flags in your younger kids, like fussiness, issues with sleeping, changes in their feeding and eating habits, that might be a time that you just say, okay, everyone, let's bundle up. Let's go outside for 5 minutes. And that might seem like it doesn't make a big deal, but it does. It's a reset. For our older families, some of the red flags you're going to see is, you know, changes in their moods. Obviously, I think that's the given one. But a loss in interest or a shift in interest, change in their appearance, those types of things are also red flags that, hey, maybe we need to get outside and be cold. And your teen may be very annoyed and be like, oh my gosh, why do we have to go outside? It's so stupid. It's cold. It's snowing. It's sleeting. It's all of those things. But you're going outside to get the reset. And it's interesting. It's something about going outside and freezing that might make your child very excited about being indoors, right? Like, I can't wait to get back
That's one strategy.
Right?
I love that strategy.
I think there's a great reset. It's nothing like freezing outside to make your child thankful to be in the heated home. And so getting creative in that sense. And, going back to that incentivizing stuff, maybe you're a parent that would never let your child dye their hair pink. During COVID, you might let your kid do that. Maybe you wouldn't let your kid wear certain nails. Maybe you let your kid do that. Maybe you're allowing them to dress in new and creative ways. And so that's what I mean about incentivizing, giving them more flexibility in the things they can control, because they've lost so much flexibility in the life that they've known forever. And so you're going to have to give some give and be more flexible because you're going to have to be more rigid in some of these other ways.
Yeah. I'm thinking the ability to express oneself, even in the home environment, to be able to do it in ways they haven't been able to before could feel really good in that situation. So how does a parent know when their child is really in need of professional help? We've talked about some of the preventative things. We've talked about if things are not feeling so good, some of the self-care strategies, self-soothing strategies, but it can also reach a place where professional help is needed. If they're really concerned, what might those things look like, and where do they even start as a parent?
Mm-hmm. So first and foremost, it's mood. When you see your child becoming, you're like, I don't even recognize them. If you hear yourself on the phone or texting or talking to your partner or partners and saying things like, I just don't know that person anymore. I don't even know my kid. That's a red flag. You've spent all of these months and weeks and hours and, almost a year with your kid. And if you start to not recognize that person, you should be worried. Another is any, expressions of helplessness and hopelessness. Like, what's the point? I won't be here. We're all going to die. Everyone's going to die. Like obsessions or mentioning of death. Because we're spending a lot of time at home, there are ways that you even know what your child is watching. So even if you see shifts in their interests related to that, or concerns about the ways that they used to be socially connected that now they're not, so maybe they used to have a friend they would FaceTime all day and they would be laughing and giggling and it used to annoy you. And then you notice after a couple of weeks, they're not on the phone the way that they used to be. The other thing is talking to your child really directly and saying, I'm worried. I've noticed you haven't showered. Younger kids, there may be bedwetting, so regressions. So that's another red flag. But even so, some of our older kids may bedwet. And it's saying, these are the things that I'm worried about: your mood, your appearance, your friendships. And I think that we need to talk with someone. The other piece is some of that question of when you should be worried isn't only just about the child. It's when you feel like you can't handle a situation. You don't feel like you have a good hold on it. You don't know what to do next. You're not sure on how to help your child. That's a great time to get professional help. All of professional help isn't just about the individual, the child to the therapist, but it's the family unit. If you notice you as a family unit aren't doing well, because sometimes we may think that one child is struggling, but there are other children that are being ignored and not seen, because sometimes the quiet child who, doesn't irritate the parents or isn't as direct or aggressive or those types of things, they get ignored. And so if one child is struggling in the family, it is possible that the family unit itself may be struggling, in that family therapy, if ever there was a time to need family therapists during a pandemic. And so that may also be an approach rather than just focusing on one person in your family.
Makes sense. There's a couple of resources that I've personally turned to for and shared with others that offer some parenting wisdom and best practices on child mental health, and we'll put those links up. The first is the Weill Cornell Medicine child psychology programs. They've offered a series of wonderful webinars throughout the pandemic that I think offer a lot of practical ideas for families, and also explore the issues of warning signs in greater depth. The other is the Child Mind Institute. Very similarly has a number of programs and resources available to help guide folks. So I guess, my next question for you, Dr. Crawford, is, and we've explored this a little bit, but I wonder if you might add on to it. What advice do you have for caregivers who are struggling to keep all these balls in the air right now, and are perhaps struggling emotionally themselves? Because I'm thinking about that connection between parent mental health and child mental health, right? And we've talked a little bit about reevaluating your own expectations of your child. I often talk to our faculty and staff about reevaluating the expectations they have for themselves right now. We're an Ivy League institution. People care about their work. They take it very seriously, but it has been a lot this year. Any suggestions for caregivers in terms of just kind of keeping it all together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, first and foremost is having a resource when you feel worried, and having that in your phone already. So in New York, we have the mobile crisis line, but having the suicide or crisis hotline, which is 1-800-273-TALK, is a wonderful resource when you just feel like I am about to scream and lose it. There's also a resource for texting. If you're not a verbal person, and this could be shared with your teen as well, the 1-800-273-TALK could work for adults and teens. But the 741, you just text hi. And it's a text hotline that you can just text with someone like, hey, I'm really struggling. I'm having a hard time. So I think that piece for professional help for parents is really important. Another resource that I love is Therapy for Black Girls. It's specifically a website to find Black women therapists, not that you have to be a Black woman therapist. That's just where Black women therapists, a big listing, as well as Psychology Today. Right now, therapy is virtual. It has never been easier. So I used to think that, it was such a hard experience for parents to find out a time to actually go to therapy for themselves. It's the hour to get to therapy. It's the hour of the therapy. And then there's the hour to get home. If you're lucky, that's only a 3-hour commitment. The other things that may come into that could make it a 4 or 5-hour commitment. Right now, most therapists are available online, and you can see anyone in your state that is licensed. So you don't even have to worry about the commute. And so one of the things that if you're feeling like I'm having a hard time managing things, go to therapy. I personally don't think anyone should be out in these 2020 streets without a therapist. This is, and I may dare say an individual therapist, a family therapist, a couples therapist, because there has never been in our lifetime more stressors than now. And so if you're struggling to keep all those balls in the air, once you get into those resources, the grounding question is, do you really need to be juggling that many balls? What can go? Maybe it's that your child is logging in for their remote learning, but you're not on them about their homework every day. Maybe it's just one day a week, and sometimes the homework doesn't get done. That's going to have to be okay. Maybe your house is junky sometimes, and you're going to have to just accept that. Maybe for you as a parent, you feel better when you clean the house than you do when you take a shower, and you'll have to make those choices. And so really being able to sit and breathe and say, what do I need and what has to go? Because some of it may be what you want, but it's not what you need.
Thank you, Dr. Crawford. We have a question that has come in that I think is on the minds of a lot of families, or is an experience of many parents and caregivers. And this comes from Emily. Emily says, we have more opportunities to parent now that we are at home more with our kids. My partner and I parent very differently, though, and it's been a challenge. What advice might you have for a parent for navigating this when they have very different ideas of, and I think that there's both the academic pieces, the social pieces, but there's also like, they may have, the two parents may have different feelings on what health practices make the most sense, right? I know some parents where one is, we're not leaving the house at all, and another parent is like, we're going to go out and we're going to do it safely. Any advice for those two-parent households?
Yeah, I think starting with the value sort, like what is most important and why. The other thing is, what I find is sometimes parents that have these conflicts in parenting, it's related to who they're parenting. So are you parenting your inner child, and that child that wished for certain things when they, like your old self, like who are you really parenting? Or are you parenting your actual children that are in front of you? Mm-hmm. And so if you're parenting your actual children in front of you, the needs of that child are probably going to be pretty similar, right? Because the child hasn't changed. The two parents may be different, but it's the same kid. And so being able to reflect on, like, what does our actual child need, rather than these fundamental values that are based on, I never wanted to be my parents, and I don't believe in these things, and this is why when I grew up, when I used to have kids, I want these things. That's all great and beautiful in a perfect world, but right now we are not there. So really thinking about what does your actual child need can be really helpful. The other piece is couples therapy, or spending some time at night to really say, these are my three big hitters. These three things really, really matter to me in parenting. What are your three big hitters? And so getting annoyed about something that isn't even in your top three, then you need to reflect, and you might need to just chill out a little bit, because if you don't care that much, don't act like you care that much. Sometimes we're like bickering and arguing over principles that are not even in our top three principles in life. And if you have enough energy, maybe your top five. But if it's not in your top five, sometimes you just need to walk away and let your partner parent the child. And maybe that might be a time for you to take your nap. Like some of it, you might need to just get out of the mix sometimes. And that can be really hard, especially for parents that are more engaged. I think for me, as a very strategic parent, I've had to do a lot of meditation. I often say that my roommates, being my husband and my two children and dog, that never leave, my roommates keep giving me wonderful opportunities for me to be a better person, to be more peaceful, to be more grounded, to do the things that I recommend to my patients. I'm like, oh my gosh, these folks are going to make me deep breathe today. And so like, I'm going to be so good at patience. And so really looking at some of these points of irritation as opportunities for you to grow. Now, when it comes to the safety stuff, that's a hard one, because we're talking about concrete, real issues. And I've heard a lot of families that do everything right, and then someone still gets COVID, and we don't know enough, to be honest, about COVID. I have a dear friend that their partner got COVID, and no one understands why. I've heard a couple of cases this week that people were really safe, and my patients and my friends, and we just don't understand it. And so I think that it becomes really crucial that you recognize you can control certain things, and then some things you cannot. You have to let go.
Yeah. We have spent most of this time talking about parenting young children and teens and tweens. We did have a question, and I think this will be our last question, Dr. Crawford, from Nicholas. He says, I apologize, this is a question from Kate. What do you do for a recent college graduate that has moved home? Maybe they've lost their job, or there's other circumstances. They come home as young adults with their own ideas of functioning in the world, maybe are no longer comfortable with following mom and dad's rules, and yet mom and dad are trying to run this household in a safe way. Any wisdom for families that now have a college-age child living back at home with them?
Yeah, our poor recent graduates. My heart breaks for every recent graduate and every freshman. Go to your kids and ask them what they perceive the solution to be. So the goal in parenting is to raise, one of the goals, but it's to raise people that can be independent thinkers, and that can generate solutions for themselves. Okay. And so if you're struggling and you're trying to spend so much energy, like, what is the answer? How do I do this? Ask them, like, how do they think you should navigate it? What is their proposal? I was really fortunate to have a mother that when I was going through those growing pains, I went to nursing school for 2 years and went to high school my last 2 years. So I really thought I was grown because I was a nurse at 17. And I said, I don't agree with these rules. And she said, well, write down what you think the rules should be and what would be reasonable. Mm-hmm. And then we had that conversation. I said, well, this is what I think. And she said, okay, I can give you a little bit of room on this. This is why I can't give you room on this. This is how you can get there. I would need to be comfortable with this. And so then it opened up communication. And then I had to be the generator as a teenager of solutions. to the problems that I was having, because I imagine that a lot of times with these young folks that are now adults living with their adult parents, the parents are trying to reestablish their authority. Mm-hmm. And so you parents for 20 some years, let them drive a little bit. Ask them what they think you should do. And then start the conversation from there, rather than you trying to bring down the discipline and the structure and the rules.
And I think in some cases that actually works as well for younger children, maybe not to such a degree, but I remember whenever I posed the question back to my daughter when she was younger, she would often come back with more firm rules or consequences than I even originally was thinking. So it's just funny how once you put children in the driver's seat, they look at it from a bit of a different lens. So that actually takes us to the end of our program. I want to thank you, Dr. Crawford, for sharing your expertise and wisdom with us. Do you have any parting thoughts before we sign off?
Yeah, when you look back at this time in your life, what do you want to be able to say about how you handled this? And let that answer be how you drive your behavior and your choices and the options that you feel like you have.
I think that's beautiful. Well, thank you again, and thank you to the eCornell production team for making this discussion possible today. Please be safe and healthy, everyone.
Thank you.